Hello everyone, welcome to the election future. Today, we are going to evaluate the most risky places for you. We are going to take a look at the 2024 election map based on the latest polls in the all 50 states to see who is the favorite to win the election in November. I will lay the floor to our host brain.
The election is becoming much more shocking, starting with Trump's safe states. These are the states that would take a miracle for Harris to win. The former president can count on Alaska, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, all of Nebraska except for its second district, Kansas, Oklahoma, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, and South Carolina. These are all states where Trump shows high polling in most, if not all, polls thus far, and they are also states that Trump won by safe margins in 2020. We can also give Trump Maine's second district since it is one of two districts that don't have enough data for us to analyze. The most recent poll shows Harris winning it by +5, which is quite different from 2020, where Trump won it by +7.4, and it is a huge outlier compared to the rest of its polling this cycle. Just for reference, when polls first started and Biden was still in the race, Trump was getting margins of +14 and then +20, which makes me think this result is really off. Because of this, I'm going to make it a lean Trump district. Remember, the margins for our map today are 1 to 3% tilt, 3 to 7% lean, 7 to 12% likely, and anything greater than 12 points is considered safe or solid. For Harris, she can expect to safely win the states of Hawaii, Washington, California, Colorado, Illinois, Maine's first district, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Delaware, Maryland, and D.C. We're also going to give her Nebraska's second district, which is the other one without enough data. The most recent poll shows Harris winning by a margin of just +5, which is lower than in 2020, where Biden won it with +6.6. I think it will get closer and closer, with Trump eventually making it a heated tilt district, either managing to flip it entirely or getting very close. For now, though, I'll lean it in her favor. Even though her list of safe states is much shorter than Trump's, she does have the political juggernauts of California and New York, which put her initially ahead. Moving on to the states that many expect to be less competitive and aren't widely considered real battlegrounds, some of these are really close and seem to be only getting closer, even without any adjustments. Starting us off is Oregon. Oregon is one of the surprising states I mentioned, not only when Biden was still in the race, and it got pretty close, but also when Harris took over and initially brought it back. Now it's close again. The most recent poll in Oregon shows Harris only leading by a margin of +5, with 49% to 44%. Looking back to 2020, polls showed Biden was expected to win by a margin of +21.3, but he only ended up winning by a still impressive +16.1. Unfortunately for Harris, this makes the margin of error about +5.2 in Trump's favor, which turns this 5-point lead basically into a tie. I don't think it will be this close since a 16-point shift in 4 years is quite drastic, but based on our map, these numbers alone make Oregon a toss-up. Next up is New Mexico. New Mexico and Colorado have proven to be very similar politically over the last few cycles, but Colorado seems to be becoming more blue while New Mexico is getting closer and closer. As of the most recent numbers, the most recent poll in New Mexico shows Harris leading Trump by just +5, her lowest margin so far, but not the lowest number for Democrats here this cycle. Biden's last poll showed him ahead by +1 and +2. In 2020, however, polls were much more accurate here than in some of its neighbors, but they still weren't perfect. Polls showed Biden was expected to win by +11.7, but he only won by about +10.8, making the margin of error about +0.9 in favor of Trump. Applying this to the most recent poll doesn't change much, but if it gets any closer, it could. For now, though, we can lean it in Harris's favor. Moving into the South is Texas, the Lone Star State. Being the second largest state in the nation and representing 40 electoral votes, Texas has a historical trend of underestimating Republicans, especially in 2020. In that election, polls showed Trump was only expected to win by a margin of 1.1, making it one of the closest states in the nation. In reality, though, voters ended up giving Trump the win by about plus 5.6, still considered close, but not the crazy tilt margin that was expected. This makes the margin of error about plus 4.5 in favor of Trump. The most recent average shows Trump winning by plus 6.3, while the last poll shows him winning by plus 8. Applying our margin to the most recent poll makes Texas a safe Republican state with plus 12.5. Next is Florida, representing the third most electoral votes, just behind Texas with 30. Harris seems to be closing the gap as time goes on. Looking at the average, it shows Trump only ahead by plus 4.2, with the most recent poll showing a similar margin of plus 6. Luckily for him, polls in the last election were quite wrong. Polls in 2020 showed Biden was expected to win by plus 2.5, but it actually went to Trump by about plus 3.4. This makes the margin of error about plus 5.9, bringing his current margin of plus 6 to plus 11.9, just 0.1 away from making Florida solid red. This makes Florida a likely Republican state. In Virginia, polls in 2020 showed Biden was expected to win by plus 11.8, but he actually won by a slightly lower margin of plus 10.1, making the error about plus 1.7 in Trump's favor. What makes this interesting is how close Virginia is shaping up to be, with some polls even showing Trump ahead. Harris leads by plus 8 in her latest poll, and her margins seem to be getting larger. For now, when we apply the 1.7 to the current 8, Harris leads in Virginia by plus 6.3, enough to lean it in her favor. In the Midwest, there are only a few states not considered to be really close battlegrounds, like the Rust Belt, Minnesota, and Ohio. Today, Minnesota has the longest voting streak in the nation, voting Democrat for 12 straight elections. But in 2020, polls were a little off, predicting a plus 9.2 Biden win versus the actual margin of plus 7.1. This makes the margin of error about plus 2.1 in favor of Trump. 538's current polling average shows Harris ahead with plus 6.2, and the most recent poll shows a similar margin in Harris's favor. Adjusting for 2020's bias, Harris manages to win Minnesota by plus 4.9, making it a lean Democrat state. In Ohio, this trend of underestimating Trump continues. In 2020, polls showed Trump barely winning with plus 0.8, but he actually won with about plus 8, making the margin of error one of the biggest so far, adding plus 7.2 to Trump's current lead. 538 recently released their polling average for Ohio, showing Trump ahead by plus 9, with the last poll showing a similar lead of plus 8. Adjusting either puts Trump's margin over 12 points, enough to make Ohio a solid red state. Finally, before we dive into the 7 highly contested battleground states, we have the last few less competitive states in the Northeast: New Jersey, New Hampshire, and Maine's statewide contest. In New Jersey, I'll label it a likely Democrat state since the average error is about plus 4.5 from 2020, and Biden won with plus 15.9. The last poll shows Trump ahead by plus 1, but this is outdated since it was against Biden. There aren't any polls between Trump and Harris yet. In New Hampshire, we have more data. Harris currently leads by an average margin of plus 6.9, with the most recent poll showing her ahead by about plus 8. In 2020, the average margin of error was plus 3.8 in favor of Trump, as polls predicted a Biden win of plus 11.1, while he won by plus 7.4. Applying this to the most recent poll brings Harris's plus 8 down to plus 4.2, making New Hampshire a lean Democrat state. In Maine, the most recent poll shows Harris ahead by plus 17, her biggest margin yet. The average error from 2020 isn't enough to affect the safe margin significantly, as it comes out to about plus 3.9, favoring Trump. Because of this, we can make Maine on the statewide level solid blue. With only 7 of the closest states remaining, both candidates are currently neck and neck. Starting in the West is our first battleground state, Nevada. The race between Harris and Trump in Georgia is neck and neck, with poll results shifting almost daily. Georgia is once again living up to its reputation as a hotly contested battleground state in the 2024 presidential election. Today, we're going to break down the 8 most recent polls, revealing just how close this race is and what it could mean for the final outcome in Georgia. With its 16 electoral votes, Georgia has become one of the most sought-after states in recent elections, especially after a historic shift in 2020 when the state flipped blue for the first time in decades. Both campaigns are leaving nothing to chance in 2024. With its mix of urban, suburban, and rural voters, Georgia's political landscape is diverse and complex, making every vote count. Harris is focusing on mobilizing urban voters in cities like Atlanta and Savannah, emphasizing healthcare reform, voting rights, and climate action. Trump, however, has a strong grip on rural areas and is appealing to voters concerned with economic recovery, law and order, and border security. Both candidates are pouring resources into the state, understanding that Georgia could be pivotal in the final electoral count.
These poll results show that Georgia remains highly competitive, with Trump leading in 6 of the 8 polls, often by just a few points. Harris has managed to tie in 2 polls, indicating she is still a formidable contender, especially in urban areas like Atlanta and its suburbs. Despite Trump's slight edge in the most polls, the margin is so narrow that any significant shift in turnout or voter sentiment could easily tip the scale in either direction. Now, if we compare these polls results with last month's result from Georgia, we see that the race has remained extremely competitive with some slight shift between Harris and Trump. In August, Harris was leading in most polls, constantly maintaining a small edge over Trump with 1 to 3 percentage points. For instance, in one of the 4 morning consult polls, Harris led by 3 points. However, Trump managed to claim a narrow lead in the Radfield and Wilton Strategies poll from August 15 to 28 with a 2-point margin. Fast forward to the latest September polls, and Trump seems to have gained some ground. Harris now leading in 6 out of 8 polls, with margins as high as 4 points in Quinnipiac University poll. Despite these gains, Harris has still managed to hold her own, tying in 2 polls and keeping the race incredibly tight. These fluctuations suggest that while Trump is making inroads in certain areas, Harris' support remains strong, particularly in Georgia's urban centers. Georgia's growing suburban population, especially around Atlanta, will likely play a decisive role. Both candidates are working hard to sway these critical voters who in recent years have shown a tendency to lean more Democratic. While Trump is leading in most of the recent polls, the race remains too close to call. Georgia is known for its razor-thin margins, and voter turnout will be critical in determining the final outcome. Both campaigns will need to focus heavily on grassroots efforts and voter mobilization if they hope to secure victory in this key battleground state. Now, watch any of these videos to learn the latest poll results from another state. What do you think? Will Georgia lean red or blue this time around? Share your prediction in the comment below. Thank you for your watching this video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the election future. See you next time.